Hey guys, Frosty Knives here, back with another book review. And we are continuing our journey through Malazan, Book of the Fallen. And we are on book number 2, Deadhouse Gates. And I just want to say right off the top of the bat, what a phenomenal read this book turned out to be. I haven't been this enthralled with a book in years. I haven't been carried away by a book or have felt the range of emotions that I did with this book for quite a while. So kudos to Erikson for churning out a novel this good. So let's get the particulars out of the way. Book was published in 2000 and it clocks in at 836 pages. And that's about 200 pages more than Gardens of the Moon. And those extra 200, almost 200 pages really helped the book flesh itself out, and it really gave the book the time that it needed to tell the story that it wanted. So this is a sequel of sorts, a sequel to Gardens of the Moon. It takes place on a completely new continent. There's a completely new storyline. There's virtually a completely new cast of characters. A handful, a smattering of people from the first book do show up in this book. But overall, we get a new continent. We get a new bunch of characters, a new cast of characters, and we get a new conflict. And I just have to say that the pacing in this book really... It's really well paced. With the first book, I had a bit of issues. There was a bit of confusion of what was going on. It was, these books are very dense, and there's a lot of characters and there's a lot of things going on. So if you remember in my first review, I was a bit confused, and things didn't really start to click until about 3/4 of the way into the book. Then it did start to click. I didn't have those issues with this book. This book was very well paced. It was very easy. It was easier to follow than the first book was. So either I'm getting used to the way Erikson is writing, or he's really come into his own on how he paces the book, and he really gives the time needed to tell the story. It's still just as dense. It's still just as many characters, but it was easier to follow, at least for me. There were 5 distinct storylines that wound through the book from 5 different sort of sets of characters. 5 things were going on that carried over through the novel. And for the most part, it was easy for me to follow. I didn't have, there wasn't a lot of confusion, and I didn't have a lot of, it wasn't hard to follow what was going on, even when he was going from one storyline to the other storyline. The book is set up it's split into 4 books, right? Part 1, Part 2, 3, and 4. So without giving away too much of the story, Book 1 was sort of the setup of everything that was going on. Book 2 was about the rebellion that was going on. Book 3 was, I call it the exodus of people, of what was going on. And then Book 4 was the resolution, the wrap-up. All well plotted, all well described, all well presented. The pacing was on point. The characters were just wonderful. This is such a rich cast of characters in this book. The dialogue was great. The action and what was going on was so well described, so well presented, that you felt like you were in the middle of everything. Now, I know I said in the first review that I wasn't going to give you a blow-by-blow synopsis of the story, because it was too much going on, and it would be too confusing, and it would take too long, and whatnot. And I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow synopsis of what's going on in this story, but there are a couple of things that I want to talk about, a couple of specific things, one specific thing and 2 specific characters that I want to talk about. So consider this kind of a spoiler light, right? review. I'm going to talk about some things that happen, not everything, just a certain thing and certain characters. So I'm going to try to keep it as vague as I can, but just know going into this part of the review that there are going to be some discussion about what goes on in the book, and that could be spoilery. So if that's something that you don't want to really get into, then this would be a good place to sort of stop watching, because we're going to talk about some things. There's something in the book, and there's two people in the book that I think really sort of sum up the book as a whole and the way Erikson approaches the book. So now that I've said all that, and you've had your time to decide whether or not you want to continue, here we are. Here we are with some light spoiler talk. So a good chunk of this book revolves around what they call the chain of dogs. And there are two main characters that are involved in the chain of dogs. That's Coltane, who's leading the chain of dogs, and that's Duker, who is an imperial historian whose job is to write about the chain of dogs. He's a historian, so it's his job to get out into the battlefield and to see what's going on and to write about it in a non-biased way, right? For posterity, for history's sake. So, without getting into too many spoilers, the chain of dogs is essentially, there's a rebellion going on. And so it's on a really large continent, and it starts at the top with the city at the top, and it ends with the city all the way at the bottom. So Coltane decides that he's going to lead all of the refugees that were in that city. He's going to lead them out, away from the fighting, away from the people that are trying to murder them. And he's going to lead them down to the city at the bottom of the continent, to Erin, where they'll be safe. That's what the chain of dogs is. And this is a massive undertaking, because they are literally taking thousands of people. At one point, I believe they mentioned that the chain of dogs was 50,000 refugees, most of them noble-born, and other refugees that they pick up from other cities, other encampments as they're going. This is a huge train, 50,000 strong at its biggest point, I believe it was. A lot of numbers went around, and they marched for miles. At miles. It took them months. I think the final count was 5 months. They marched for months through the desert, because this continent is a desert. They marched through the desert, all the while fending off the attacks of people that are trying to kill them. And Coltane was the one who led the chain of dogs and was responsible for defending them and for doing all, defending all, keeping them alive. And Duker was the imperial historian who went with them to chronicle it, to watch this march, and to record it in an unbiased way, right? He's there to basically write down what happens. Not judgment, not making any judgments, just write down what actually happens. And this was a good chunk of the book. And it was ridiculous. It was phenomenal. Let me just say that Erikson is not shy in showing us death and horror. This book is dark. This book is darker than Gardens of the Moon. This book is very dark. It's very bleak. This book is almost genocidal bleak. The body count is high in this book. The body count is very high in this book. But he shows us this march. And he shows us in a way that we feel like we're there. And I like the fact that he showed us the march, not from the point of view of the military commanders that are leading the march and that are defending the march, but he's really showing us the march through the eyes of a historian, someone who's not a soldier. He is there to chronicle what's going on. He's not a fighter. He's not a soldier. He's a journalist. And he's there to give us a non-judgmental, unbiased opinion or view of what's going on. Just the facts. This is what happened. You know, this is where they went. This is the battle. This is what happened on this march. And I think that's a good choice that he shows us this march from a layman's point of view, right? Because we get to wrestle with the same things that Duker gets to wrestle with, right? He shows us the march, and he witnesses the whole thing, and he has to write it down. But in his own mind, he now has to decide how he's going to deal with what he's seeing, right? He's not making judgments outwardly, but inwardly, he's thinking, you know, what are we doing? Is this hopeless? Can this even be done? Why are we doing these things? And he talks about the brutality of it. He talks about the futility of it. Talks about the hope of it and the hopelessness. He goes through all the range of emotions. And because we're seeing this march through his eyes, we're going through the same range of emotions as well, right? We're going through the ups and the downs, and we're seeing the horror and the brutality, and we're seeing the hope, the glimmers of hope and the good things that happen, and we're seeing the terrible things that happen, and we're seeing it all. And I think that's a fantastic way to present what's going on in this book. I love the character. I love all the characters in the book. I really do. I can't point to one character that I don't really care about. But I really like the character of Coltane. I really like the character of Duker. I really liked the story of the chain of dogs and the march and how they even got that name, right? How that name was given to them, because it explains why they were called that. And it also sort of talks about, in a peripheral view, how the outside world, like how all the other cities, sort of view what Coltane is doing. You know, some view him as a hero, some view him as just someone on a futile quest, and how the rest of the continent sort of either rallies or doesn't rally behind him and them as they're doing their thing. I think this was the hallmark of the book. I think this was the crown jewel of the entire novel. There's a lot of other things that are going on besides the chain of dogs that I won't get into. There is a lot of new information, a lot of bombshells that Erikson gives us that I had to... He would present a bombshell and I would have to stop. I would have to reread it and say, did I read that correctly? And then I'd have to process it, because he's now starting to answer some of the questions that we had from the first book. He's starting to answer that. He's peppering in more about the world and the people in the world and what's going on in the world and the gods and the empire and everything that's going on. So we're slowly getting to see more and more of this universe that he's creating, and he's answering some questions, but we still got a whole ton of questions that we need answers to. But he's starting that process, and we're learning more, and I feel more comfortable in this world. I don't feel as confused as I did anymore. I'm starting to feel more comfortable with the characters and the way the magic system works, the way the empire is, and the way the gods are. It's more familiar, and I think that hopefully that should just increase the further we go into this series. If you started this series and you didn't like Gardens of the Moon and you weren't sure whether or not you wanted to continue with it, I would recommend reading Deadhouse Gates and seeing how you feel after that. And if after Deadhouse Gates you're still not feeling the series, you're still confused, you still don't think it's for you, then maybe it's not, and maybe and maybe this just not for you. But I have a feeling that Deadhouse Gates is going to grab people and it's gonna kind of push them forward, just like the chain. It's gonna grab you, just like the chain of dogs will grab you, and it's gonna push you forward, whether or not you want to march. You're just so invested. I'm just so invested at this point. I got 8 more books to go. I'm on book 3 now. Got 8 more books to go that I'm just so invested that I feel like now I'm on my own personal chain of dogs. That I'm just going to keep marching, even when you get tired and you get burnt out and you feel like, what's the point? There's a point at the end, though. You know, there's a point. Just like the end of, hopefully the ending of our journey isn't as bleak, but it may be. So guys, that's my review of Deadhouse Gates. This, just based on the fact of the character of Coltane and the Chain of Dogs and Duker, this got an instant 5 out of 5 for me on Goodreads. This was just a book where I would say, read it. I would almost say, read it alone. Even if you don't want to read any of his other books, as a standalone novel, this is good, right? Even if you don't read the first book, and even if you have no other plans on reading any, I would still say, read this book for the tale that it tells you, for the story that it says. It's really good. It talks about, there's a lot of philosophical debates in this book. There's a lot of talk about war and rebellions and history and what it means to be a fallen soldier, what it means to be an unnamed soldier, how history looks upon battles of the past and wars of the past and how we view that. A lot of philosophical discussion in this book. And I would say read it, even if you don't have any plans of reading any of the other books. As a standalone novel and the story that it is trying to tell, it's phenomenal. So guys, that is my review of Deadhouse Gates. And we will be on to book 3, Memories of Ice. And these books just keep getting bigger and bigger as we continue down the series. And I love it. I'm loving all of it. I'm loving every single one of it. Like a McDonald's Big Mac. Do. I'm loving it. There's a little jingle for you. So guys, hope you enjoyed the review. If you, as always, just, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment if you've read it. If you want to talk about it, leave it below. We'll discuss it. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your mailman, tell your postman. Tell anyone you want to. Hell, put it up somewhere. Get a billboard for those of you that are fortunate enough to live in states that have billboards. Put it on a billboard. So guys, that's my review. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, I will see you in the next video.